Hey, this is Ramon, Channels Alpha 4, and this is my Bible study series. And we are doing Genesis chapter 26, Abimelech returns. Alright, so first the recap. Famine strikes the land around Canaan. The blessing is transferred to Isaac. Isaac travels to Grrrr and meets Abimelech. And Esau gets married. Alright, so now let's get to the notes. Little is known about Isaac compared to the other patriarchs. He is a comic and passive figure in this story, and this chapter is really the only chapter that's truly dedicated to him. His story repeats the Abrahamic narrative as a reminder to us, the readers, to keep Abraham's faith. The promise is renewed with a passage concerning the many seeds of Isaac. Now, Jews, Christians, and Muslims all see themselves, or all see this passage as a direct reference to themselves. The famine that has Isaac have to leave is the second biblical famine in the Bible. And I don't know why that's important, but that was mentioned in all the commentaries. This chapter also contains the third matriarch in peril story. Yet in this chapter, the wife is left safe, and Abimelech is more honorable and more understanding than he was before. Although, to be fair, he was fairly honorable in the other version. But also, he is more critical now. I almost wonder why he didn't ask the question, why? What is it with your family in pulling this trick on my people? Like, you know, first the father does it, now the son does it. You know what I mean? It's like, what's with this calling your wife your sister thing? In the repetitive cycle of Genesis, several major events and themes are lifted directly from the Abrahamic narrative. Travel, here to Gerar, not to Egypt. The promise is repeated, matriarch endangerment, blessings of success, well stories, and a pact with Abimelech, as well as the covenant with God, of course. Critics have often thought that the author of this chapter to be different than the author of the chapters surrounding it. Could the stories have been confused with each other? Could it even be the same story from a different tradition with a different lead as its protagonist? So little detail is given to us about Isaac, and the events of his life are so tied to the larger narratives of Abraham and Jacob, and even to the larger story of the Bible, that one can't help but wonder about the patriarch so little is known about. Was Isaac overconfident, careless, foolish? Why did he make the choices he made, or do the things he did? Yet for all of his mistakes, Isaac is prosperous in the land of and around Grrrr. There's no way to say that and not laugh. Okay. Sounds like I'm like growling. This would make Isaac a landowner and a farmer, something in blatant contrast with our modern notion of that these stories are of nomadic desert people, or the way that I have it in my notes, nomadic desert mystics. So these are not the stories of nomadic desert mystics. This guy was living somewhere and being successful at it. I know that's a common notion with skeptics and with atheists, that these are all desert stories, but they're not. Although they do take place in the desert, as we're going to get to with the well. The well stories are another knock against this modern notion of primitiveness. Water was sparse in the land that we think of as Grrrr. Therefore, water would have been precious, and mastery of its source would have been a way of showing ownership of the land and of displaying power in the territory. So, just like today, the city is the one that runs the water. So That's what gives it authority over you, is the fact that it can cut off access to something you need to survive. Yet that does not mean that this chapter is without its analytical or academic problems. The reference to the Philistines, for instance, is anachronistic, as they were a people who would not even enter this land until around 1200 BC. The names of the wells are also important, figuratively speaking. Their names in English illuminate this, but can be translated differently depending on the translator, clearly. The first well can be translated as either argument, quarrel, or injustice. The second well is either hostility, opposition, or enmity. And the third well can be translated as open spaces, wide spaces, or room. And the last one is simply, or not so simply, but the last one is called oath. Isaac and his clan, for growing too numerous, also experience a mini exile. And this goes to the whole cycle and how his story kind of reflects the greater narrative of the Old Testament. So his clan have to go into a mini exile and have to move to the outskirt of the territory controlled by Abimelech, according to one commentary, to an area 25 miles away from Grrrr proper. Here with the last well, we get a second story or a second explanation for the place name of Beersheba. I could not figure out why Beersheba is so important. As far as I know, it's not a major historical site. So I don't know why Beersheba is so strongly emphasized in these Genesis stories. Maybe it was a more important place at one time in history. It sounds like I'm whispering. I just did a lot of work with writing with the thing that I'm doing, so I'm a little tired. We also get to the third patriarchal altar, the others being those of Noah and Abraham. This establishes a tradition that will be abandoned and then banned by later Hebrewic tradition. I think my original note said by later Hebrewic or law, but for some reason in this note it still says tradition. Yet, because of Isaac's continued success, Abimelech wants to make peace with him and establish a non-aggression pact between their people. Now, I don't like the fact that I wrote down their people, because I kind of feel like the pact was between the two individuals. But I think they're representing larger ideas or larger cultures. So here the cultures, I guess, would be the Canaanite culture. Although he's not really a Canaanite. I don't know what Gerar is. In all my research, I couldn't find exactly what territory it was in. Anyway, the reason for the want of this pact is that ancient superstition dictated that those who did well must be blessed either by the gods or fate or destiny. And it was thought that just as one cursed man could ruin a whole city or a whole community. Here, when we say city or community, think of a nation. These are kind of pre-city-state defined territories. Then, so too, could a blessed family save a city? And for that idea, just simply go back to Sodom and Gomorrah, how you could find basically a clan's worth of people, a family's worth of people, the city would be saved. So Abimelech wanted a share of Isaac's blessing. The concluding banquet and feast was part of an official oath ceremony, making this pact a legal covenant between Isaac and Abimelech. Again, repeating the theme from Abraham, where buying the land made it official. Here, having the oath be done in an official way adds credence to the story. Then we get to a passage that was originally tied to another section of Genesis, chapter 27, verse 46, through chapter 28, verse 6, which makes me question the arbitrary numbering and dividing of the Bible in the 14th and 15th century AD into chapter and verse. A better standard, meaning current modern-day conventions of sentence, paragraph and chapter structure would be appreciated, just saying. This passage in this chapter is a reasoning for Rebekah's actions toward Esau. Originally I had saying that it was a retrojection, kind of like trying to go back and justify her earlier actions as well. And also kind of like backwards working to the Ishmael story, kind of justifying that situation as well. I kind of feel like this is the editor or the writer saying that trying to justify the matriarch's actions, because when they read this, they realized that the matriarchs weren't coming off looking as bright and as shiny as they might want them to, or as noble, I guess I should say. So this passage in this chapter is a reasoning for Rebekah's actions toward Esau, though a reasoning I think is lacking in justification, yet very realistic to human experience and human psychology. Just to be clear, I've thought this stuff a long time ago. Like, I had these thoughts back when I was like, well, the first time I tried reading this, I was 15. But when I was reading this in college, I would take down these kind of notes and have these kind of thoughts. But there was no YouTube back then. And now Jordan Peterson's out there saying all this stuff, and it sounds like I'm just repeating what he said. Trust me, when I first read all this stuff, I read all the ancient texts that I loved reading, and the Bible that I specifically liked using for my original commentary was an academic text from Oxford, and it has all these kind of ideas in there. So Jordan Peterson is not that original, just to be clear. I like his stuff. I'm just saying his delivery style is great, but he's not that original. This stuff has been out there for a very long time. Even going back to the early church fathers, they acknowledge most of this stuff. So why the evangelicals lost their ability to reconcile or acknowledge these kind of biblical facts, I don't know. Anyway, okay. Then we get to Esau. Okay, so let me finish saying what I was saying, which is that Rebekah's actions, though I don't think are justifiable, they are very realistic to human experience and very realistic to human psychology. And anyone who's had a friend who's had a bad time with their family knows this is true. I mean, there are mothers who hate the daughter-in-laws, and there are in-laws who hate each other, and families who are had out of wedlock who resent each other. I mean, this stuff just happens. It's very realistic, and it's, to me, reported very accurately in these stories. Then we get to Esau. Okay, Esau gets married to Canaanite women, and these women vex Rebekah and Isaac. Though that never plays out in the story as it is written. You just kind of expect there to be more detail, and there never is. But in the Genesis stories, that's par for the course. They don't usually give more detail than is necessary. I say the story doesn't usually give more detail than is necessary. There are 4 women mentioned in this passage in total: Esau's 2 new wives and their mothers. The wives' names are Judith, which means praise, and Basmith, which means balm or spice. Balsam. Balsam? Okay. These 4 women are Hittites, Hivites, and Canaanites, respectively, and they represent those who would contend against God, His Word, Christ, and His church. Now, for those going strictly from a Judaic perspective, you can just simply look at it as those are the people who would contend against God. For those of the Christian faith, clearly you'd add Christ and the church. I have no idea how the other Abrahamic religions beyond that, or those that view themselves as an Abrahamic religion, view this story beyond that. Yet there are contradictions here, And contradictions are something I said I would not shy away from. If you heard that video I made criticizing one particular biblical scholar who's on YouTube, there are contradictions here. For instance, this passage contradicts a later chapter in Genesis, chapter 36, verses 2 through 4. Here, Elon's daughter is Basmath, but there her name is Ada, and there Basmath is Ishmael's daughter. So there in chapter 36, Esau's wives are Ada, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, Oholibamah, the daughter of Anna the Hivite, and Basmath, the daughter of Ishmael, while Judith is simply missing from that list. Okay. Now, let's get to our questions. Okay, and I got plenty of questions for this one, which is funny because when I read it this last time around, I didn't really think there were that many questions there. I just kind of went through this chapter very quickly, thought there really wasn't much there because it was repeating so much narrative. But when I actually started writing out some questions, I actually had a bunch. So here we go. Do you find yourself repeating your parents' lives in your own life? How much are you, and how much are you them meaning your parents? What is the importance of knowing the names of Abimelech's general, Phicol, and his chancellor, Azarath? Azarath? Azarath. I don't know. Did this add to the realism of the story? Were these known real people that had to be mentioned to give this story, legitimacy, or to give this chapter legitimacy? Are they mentioned for political reasons? Is this Abimelech the same individual who interacted with Abraham? Could Abimelech perhaps be a dynastic name, or simply a coincidence that both patriarchs dealt with a different powerful man of the same name? Could this be a flaw in the storytelling, or a problem of synchronization between different oral traditions that the complier, there, this time I said it right, that the complier couldn't fix? Is the story repeating Abraham's because the historical chronology just didn't work if they simply skipped straight to Jacob from Abraham? Did the storyteller just not know Isaac's story well enough and had to simply borrow from the Abrahamic tradition to fill in the gaps? Those are all questions that I had. Please answer any and all. All right, this was chapter 26. I hope you guys are enjoying my new format with this. I'm basically, so I read it, read the commentaries, write out my notes, then I rewrite my notes out on Word. So I write it up by hand first, and then I write them, then I type them out, and I organize them, and I clean them up, and I put my thoughts together, and then I print them out, and this is what you got. So I hope this is enjoyable. I hope you're liking this. Peace, like, subscribe. Talk to you guys next time.